Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending where you are in the wider region. Welcome to this session on a very important topic and to cover a set of questions that really are, I think, on the minds of many sustainability professionals around the world, including yourselves in the audience. We're sure whether you're in government, in business, in science, and very much so whether you're in the finance sector. Context here, of course, is to this session is the climate change phenomenon, and the question for us today is while it might be too late, or the phenomenon might be too advanced and too tectonic for us to be able to stop it at this point fully or to reverse it, how can we, at the very least, help contain it, control it, limit it to a certain extent so that it doesn't become too disruptive to global society, so that it doesn't become too much of an existential threat to global civilization, really. So in other words, how can we limit global warming? How can we limit climate change to well below 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 degrees? How can we stabilize the climate system at that level in the lead up to 2100? But we need to achieve stabilization well before that. And to that effect, how can we transition the economy, the real economy, for it to reach a state of net zero emissions by 2050? I think those are, the pertinent questions here for our discussion, the broader context. Of course, we're going to be focusing on what all of this means specifically in the geographic context of Africa and the Middle East, and we're going to be looking at what it means specifically for the finance sector, and within the finance sector, in particular, commercial banking. We have a great panel today to discuss these topics and these questions. It's my, sincere pleasure to welcome our distinguished panelists that cover a number of different geographies across Africa and the Middle East, and also cover a number of different stakeholders. So we have from the commercial banking constituency, Dr. Dalia Abdelkader, who is Chief Sustainability Officer at CIB in Egypt. We have also from commercial banking, Judith Sidi Odhiambo, who's the group head of corporate affairs at KCB in Kenya. And we have then more from the public finance side, the development banking side, with us, Davina Milenge Uvela, who is the principal program coordinator at the African Development Bank Group. My name is Remco Fischer. I am the head of climate change at UNEP Finance Initiative. And as many of you in our audience will know, our mandate at UNEP-FI is to help and catalyze the greening of the finance sector, so that the finance sector, with the tools that it has, can help green the real economy. Because that's what meets greening is the real economy. And of course, greening the real economy means very much, as we'll be discussing today, decarbonizing it. As I was saying, transitioning the economy to net zero emissions, ideally by 2050. In terms of the work that as UNEP-FI we've been doing over the years as part of this mandate, we focused historically, perhaps, a little bit on financial institutions looking at risks and opportunities, and rightly so. So looking at the environmental risks and opportunities that they are confronted with, and also looking at the climate-related risks and opportunities that they're confronted with. And we've been looking at how to assess those risks, how to manage those risks, how to disclose those risks, and among other things, to also respond to and comply with the recommendations of the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. But more recently, we've expanded, I think, our approach from only a focus on risks and opportunities and managing those well, to also an approach of environmental target setting. you could say, an approach of over time aligning financial portfolios with societal objectives, which have been, as we all know, codified in the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and also, of course, when it's about climate change specifically, in the 2015 Paris Agreement. And really, when we say aligning portfolios with the SDGs, aligning portfolios with Paris, aligning portfolios with 1.5 degrees and with net zero, what is implied is that portfolios over time develop in line with greenhouse gas emissions pathways that the science gives us and that we know are then ultimately also compatible with the long-term objectives at hand. Again, 1.5 degrees, well below 2 degrees by 2100. And we know that transition to net zero needs to happen in the real economy, the financial economy, because both reflect each other, mirror each other, influence each other, and hopefully like that we can achieve a virtuous circle, a virtuous cycle of ambition and of increasing positive environmental impacts. We're very conscious at UNEP-FI that this new agenda is new, that it is novel, that it is also a little bit hard to digest, because since when are financial institutions as market actors meant to be accountable for aligning, with UN frameworks, or meant to be accountable for managing and reducing, the environmental impacts of their portfolio companies? This is very, very new thinking. A few years ago, I don't think this thinking would have been, possible. But the good news is, as we stand here today, all of this is gaining incredible traction in different regions of the world, internationally, through things like the net zero agenda. There's a big net zero agenda now in the lead up to COP later in the year, through which a lot of action on this front is being galvanized. We have now the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and we have also, as UNEP-FI, two at the moment platforms for the finance sector through which financial institutions can make these commitments, and through which at this point we have, I think, 42 institutional asset owners committed to net zero through the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, with about 7 trillion in assets under management. And we have the equivalent now also for the banks, through the Net Zero Banking Alliance, with 44 banks, now 45 banks. It's growing continuously, and something like 30 trillion in banking assets there. So there is momentum. We applaud and appreciate the momentum that exists, and we also appreciate very much that the two commercial banks that are with us on the panel today, KCB and CIB, have decided to be founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So that's a little bit the context here. For the discussion now, there are three blocks of questions of areas that I'd like to discuss with the panel. One is, what means net zero for your region? What is that? What does that look like? What does a net zero economy in this region look like by 2050? And then if we work it backwards earlier, what are the economic transitions that need to take place, especially in key sectors, perhaps over the next 3 decades? That's the first area of question and debate. The second one is, all of these economic transformations, how can they be supported, enabled, specifically through the finance sector by banking organizations? What are their pathways, the choices that need to make, the roles really in all of this? And then the third and last block will be about more specific, more the short term. What are the more immediate steps really that commercial banks, development banks, other parts of the finance system can put in place to respond to the NZB, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and the expectations there, and more broadly to support the net zero transition in the region? And so with that, I'll stop. And on the first question, what are the economic system transformations that are actually required in the region to deliver net zero emissions by 2050? I'll firstly turn to Dr. Dalia Abdelkader, again, who's Chief Sustainability Officer at CIB in Egypt, and then to the other ones. And I would ask also the panelists to very briefly to say a few words, if they so wish, about themselves and their organization by way of introducing themselves. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Abdelkader.
Thank you, Remco, for the introduction and paving the way. Actually, I'm part of Africa. I'm part of the MENA region. And speaking about the Net Zero Alliance, it's about system transformation. Initially, it's about acknowledgement of the magnitude of threats that we are facing as a region. True that climate change is detrimental to the whole world, but when it comes to the MENA and Africa, we are in a much worse situation compared to other regions in the world. The MENA region and Africa currently face severe water scarcity. And by water scarcity, we mean lack of agriculture, lack of food. So it's about existence. It's not about luxury. It's not about growth. It's about food and water. Rising sea level, what does it mean to the MENA region? If carbon emissions are not managed, the MENA region risks losing 90% of its coastal areas and wetland, which currently includes more than 70 or 80 million people. According to the IPCC, I came across a report that says that if carbon emissions are not under control, a significant part of the MENA region will be uninhabitable in less than 100 years. So the bottom line, we are facing existential national security issues, not growth issues. But on the other hand, we have huge opportunities. Fortunately, the MENA and Africa are privileged by best spots for renewable energies, sun and wind energy. And if this takes place, we could reduce carbon emissions that are consumed by fossil fuels, which is a massive part in the MENA region. We can have energy for desalination, and so on. So it's a high gain, high pain area. I mean, this is a very special case. So we should lead net zero because we are the bloc that stands the most to lose or gain. So what we're talking about here is system transformation, and I'm really grateful for this mention on your part. It's about system transformation. However, with all the improvement that we have lately witnessed, what we have is national commitments, targets, and incremental change. And this is dangerous. We could be there when it's too late. 2050 is too late for us to target. So the bottom line of it is that what we're talking about is system transformation in the full sense of the word. And this is not easy. We're talking about pace. We cannot afford to work on distant goals. 2050, I mean, personally, as a person, as a financier, this is too distant. It's this decade. And I think there are lots of scientific reports that either you make it in this decade or it's a lost battle. And you could be there when it is too late again. I was really impressed by learning of teenagers' protests that say 2050 is nothing. I mean, what we're talking about 30 years from now, unless we have real action targeting this decade, 2030, on annual monthly reporting, we're not there. So pace is an issue. It has to be fundamentally revised. The other part of system transformation, if I may just boil it down to two elements, it's pace and scale. What do I mean by scale? I think we have to move and face climate change connecting to one another, connecting as a block. I mean, Europe is talking about Green Deal, and they're having the green taxonomy and moving as a block, although they are relatively better off than Africa and the MENA region. But before we move as a block, we need, on a national level, to move in synchronization. I mean, regulators, ministers, academia, because we have in many cases, you find a ministry moving with some regulations, but it's not reflected in the fiscal or the monetary policies. So moving as a bloc, moving as a nation, having a national platform for climate change, and on the other hand, connecting disciplines. So connecting the continent, connecting intranational actors, and connecting disciplines, because we are the outcome of 20th century siloed approach to disciplines. I mean, we were not taught to connect as financiers or bankers to the environment or society. This is not part of our culture or our education. And we really have to connect disciplines. I mean, now we hear about science-based targets, and banks are finally acknowledging science. I mean, the IPCC have been there for 40 years, but we always brushed aside science, connecting to technology, fintech, and innovation. So it's about the connection. This is the bottom line, how I see the system transformation, addressing pace and scale.
Super. Thank you very much. That was a terrific answer. I may just quickly respond to some also of the matters that you raised, because I think we are in full agreement, and I just want to convey that on some of the aspects here. I think firstly, though, what needs to be acknowledged, of course, is that this region that we're talking about today, as well as many other developing and emerging regions of the world, have contributed at least to the problem, but are expected to be impacted heaviest by the problem. I think that's a dynamic, also at all times worth remembering, as we move forward. Of course, there's a responsibility still there to avoid certain mistakes in those regions, to leapfrog, as they say, to not, take the fossil fuel route to everything, and then later on, decades later on, shift to renewables, but to take shortcuts. But I think that fundamental responsibility, or that asymmetry in responsibility and impact, needs to be considered. And that's why I think the opportunities are so important, highlighting the upside of, why is it good for these economies to take the renewable energy route that is abundant in these parts of the world? What are the economic, employment, financial benefits of that? And not only to see the problems, fully agree with that. And on pace, on the duo of scale and pace, I think this is where we hope to be supportive as UNEP-FI on both. When it comes to pace, what we've been trying to do through the alliances is deconstruct net zero by 2050 into what does that mean by 2030? What does that mean even by 2025? So that we take the action now that is needed in the medium and long term to achieve the long-term objective. That's pretty central to our work. So I would just echo very much what you're saying now. And of course, this is all informed by the science. What needs to happen by 2050, what needs to happen by 2030, etc. That information, the point of orientation that we have, and that we're hoping the financial institutions will have, is the science, and largely on scale. This is exactly it. Also for these alliances, how can we not have one bank working here, another bank working there? How can we have all of the banks with the same vision working together? Because then they can also together, approach, engage government, policymakers, industry, all of the other parts of the ecosystem that need to be a part of, a solution and strategy to net zero. So thank you for that. Just a few observations there, and I would then hand the floor to Judith at KCB. Judith, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai, for the session. So my name is Judith Sidi Odhiambo. I head the Corporate and Regulatory Affairs as well as the Sustainability Docket. And I'm happy that you're having this panel discussion and just to share our perspectives. So for KCB, of course, we are a bank. We are in the East African region, covering 6 countries in Kenya, Tanzania, South Sudan, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and we have a representative office in Ethiopia. So we have been in the banking business now for more than 100 years. And so our head office is actually in Nairobi, but as I'd said earlier, we do operate also in the other 6 countries. So from what we have gone through from our moderator who has gone through what are some of the economic system transformation that we can do as a bank, even as we look forward into 2050. And I agree, of course, with my fellow panelists that yes, 2050 is too far, especially for banking. We don't plan with such a further long-term kind of plan, but what are those steps that we shall be doing from the short-term, mid-term, in the next decade to be able to reach that overall goal that we would like to see. So of course, also in our part of the world, we do know that we've also experienced a lot of challenges in terms of climate change. We do have quite a lot of famine, and we've seen a lot of flooding or destruction of forests. All this is just to make sure that we are able to meet our day-to-day needs. When we talk about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just looking at our basics, our food, our shelter, just to be able to meet our day-to-day. So we've been able to see a lot of that destruction in terms of the impact of the climate change. And so already some priorities have been taken in terms of utilization, especially of the sun, and also utilization of wind power to be able to use them as alternatives instead of focusing on fossils. So that has also been a good trend. We've been able to see very good examples. Government has been pushing a lot on that. And so we have seen also a lot of uptake from even our customers to adopt to solar utilization more of the sun as well as the wind energy. But again, we also know that it's important also to work with government in this process, because we do know that government is important in terms of policies and in terms of putting it in the right incentives for this market. And so we do see that lower emissions, if we really need to transition to lower emissions, then we need to switch to more efficient processes and cleaner fuels. And so government can play a key role there in terms of the policies that they put in place, incentives that they'll put in place, so that it is easier for the public and for the people to adopt, stakeholders to pick it up and see that it's a good thing to work with in terms of their businesses. Also, we are looking at also organizations. How can organization embed energy transition goals into their own operating model and also corporate strategies? This will ensure accountability and commitment to innovation, because initially my fellow panelists had talked about innovation being key. So what are these things that can be done by corporates and organizations so that we can see a big transition towards energy adaptation? And also the operating model of the same, so that then we can be able to see the change that we want to see. Banks, as we know that banks are also instrumental in financing the customers as well as the organizations that operate within any of the countries. So we look at blended finance model being key, because we see blended finance then will facilitate or will fast track, especially in terms of lending much more to this green lending and the green economy sector, and therefore then we can be able to look for that traction that we'd like to see in this sector. So we shall end up, of course, getting more of social impact, more of climate return through blended finance. And we have seen that working very well, especially in our side of the world. Blended finance, it works very well, because then you have a target, you are given a set target of how much you should bring in terms of green financing. So that can also be a very good incentive. Also, financial institutions should also look at integrating long-term strategies. As I said earlier, we are not very good at planning long-term. So this long-term growth strategy will be very key, especially in facilitating low carbon projects. And therefore, we will have them to look at how best can we be able to facilitate that so that then we can be able to bring in the positive impact that we are looking for. And then we also must raise the capacity for different institutions in understanding the net zero agenda. Of course, we know it looks like a big word out there. Everybody is grappling to understand, what does this mean for my organization, for my company? But I think it's important that much more capacity building is done in this space, especially in our context of our world, so that more people can be able to see that it's something that they can actually implement It's not something that is too big, but it's something that they do on a day-to-day, but they just need to tweak a few things here and there to be able to adjust their model of banking, so that then they can accommodate much more of a green economy as well as a climate financing for our clients. So that's what I would say, and thank you. And over to you, moderator.
Thanks very much, Judith, for I think reiterating also some of the points mentioned earlier around the opportunities. Obviously, endowment of renewable energies in the region is central here. Also, pace, scale, short-term actions, and that this needs to be again a network solution between the private sector and government. Adding also the blending of finance is one instrument of how very specifically public and private can work together towards a joint set of objectives. Let me now turn perhaps to you, Davina, and your additional perspectives that you might have, of course, looking at this a little bit through more of a public lens, or the lens of a development bank, a development finance institution. Over to you on this question of the transformations required in the region.
Thanks, Kai, and thanks, my fellow panelists. I really enjoyed the take from both Dalia and Judith on the impact and the process at individual banks levels. Now, looking at the development bank level using public finance, when you look at the trajectory, even at UNFI, the pace has been very slow. I like Dalia talking about pace. I was just going through trying to do a literature review of this session. I realized it's been over 10 years since the UNFI Africa Task Force was created. And you look back, it's still the same banks that have actually launched on. And when it comes to the loan book, it's still the same. It's still very traditional way of letting out money. You still will need a guarantee no matter what you're doing. And so the public finance has not really come in the way it should to get us to the scale we talk about. So the discourse has not matched the action in terms of moving concessional climate finance. There were institutions created at a global level, both the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Funds. But it takes you as a private developer so much work to get your project through the financing of the GCF. And the whole process is so heavy that it doesn't enable action. So what we are doing, at least at the African Development Bank, and basically speaking generally for the other MDBs, is to try and leverage climate finance, create some sources of concessional financing through instruments, let's say green credit lines. We have those with some banks, and ensuring that climate is not delinked from sustainable development goals, because there's still poverty, and these things can have to go together. This is a continent that is going by 2050 will be the most, will have the highest population, the continent that is growing the most. So all those dynamics have to be built into the whole climate solution and the energy, and the sustainability goals. Because there's always competing space. So when you speak climate, it's a different channel, even in our organizations, that climate department will be separate from your economics department. Your economics colleagues barely understand what is happening on that front. And so there's need to bring all those discourse together in a way that when a bank is thinking sustainability, it's not just a mark, it's not a ESG rating on a scorecard. It is part and parcel of its livelihood. If we took an example in when we had the floods or the hurricanes in Mozambique and 3 years ago in 2018, Hurricane Kenneth and the other one, caused damage of about $2 billion on infrastructure in Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi in a space of a week or so. And so as a financial sector, those are things that need to be counted into the livelihood of the economy. So beyond trying to look at climate, we really need to embed the development discourse in a holistic manner. So I would say that first, we as development institutions, even as institutions that finance development, that climate is considered central, same as SDGs, in the livelihood and survival of financial sector. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I was muted. Apologies. I was just thanking you, Davina, for the additional points that you've raised around the need to mainstream really, climate change, but not only climate change and many other aspects of sustainability, as one package in the financial institutions, and also your point around difficulties in blending finance. Judith, you had raised the promise of blending finance, and while I think there's a lot of promise, of course, there's difficulties, especially blending finance from multilateral funds such as you mentioned the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, where processes are heavy and not very at times conducive towards, at the end of the day, blending finance. I mean, perhaps we can wrap up this part of the discussion through one additional question that I would just ask all of you in terms of simply progress, whether it's on blending finance or whether it's on regulatory frameworks that are being put in place, by governments, policies, the role of governments in the region, the role of industry in the region. Obviously, here we're discussing among financial institutions, and we are seeing progress through things like the Net Zero Banking Alliance, through things like the TCFD and other things. Are you seeing the same kind of progress when you look around in your countries, when you look at the government, the rhetoric, the policies, when you look at industry, their plans, even the fossil fuel industry, do they have plans to tackle this? When you look at your counterparts, et cetera, what's your general sense of progress beyond your organizations, perhaps? I don't know. I will just put the question to all of you for whomever would want to, come in and take a view. Judith, I see you. I see you perhaps wanting to come in.
Okay. So what I would say is that there's a lot of public education that is required, especially in this green financing space. Of course, for some of the clients and some of the stakeholders who are ahead in the game, we can find that they have taken advantage already of the green climate financing, the IFC financing that we get. So they are taking advantage for that then to do some of the projects that they have. But for sure, for the public, we really need to do a lot of public communication so that there is a better understanding of what it means to transition. And what does that mean for your future? What does that mean for your business? What does that translate in terms of even the education system? So a lot really needs to be done in terms of public education when I look around our East African region, so that there can be a lot of buy-in from all our stakeholders, including the public. Because if we are not able to address that, then people will feel that it is something that you can either do or not do. But from discussion, it looks like this is something really which is urgent. It's urgent, and we need to put in all our effort to make sure it happens. But that is not what you feel is on the ground. So for that to happen, then it means a lot of public participation must be done for that awareness. And when that push also comes from our customers, I would imagine even banks would need now to change their ways and adapt and even come up with products and services that are aligned to it. Because once the push comes from your customers, then it forces you also to adjust and adapt. And maybe that would be a better advocacy as opposed to maybe working with the private sector or the banks. If the push comes from the public and our consumers, I'm very sure then we'll be able to see a big change and a big mindset even from our own bankers. But of course, also just looking at blended finance, yes, it can work, but a lot is required. I can agree. Having to be accredited, it's not a walk in the park. It takes a bit of time. Even getting your approvals takes a bit of time. There's a bit of back and forth. But at least since the opportunities are there, and if this can be shared, then those customers and clients who are interested in that space then can jump in and take advantage of that. And of course, one of the things also just to mention is that we need also a lot of for our bankers also to change our mindset. Of course, other banks have, others have not, but all of us need to move along together, because if the pressure also comes from banks to the stakeholders, then we shall also see a much better adoption from both sides, our stakeholders as well as our banks, and also our government then will come in to ensure that then they can give in proper incentives for that market to grow. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I don't know if Dalia, you wanted to comment on this question of the progress that you see
around us, not inside the bank.
Exactly. Are you encouraged or are you concerned?
No, I am encouraged and concerned at the same time, because I would say we have incremental, fragmented achievements. Okay, and the situation, the urgency of the situation urges that we have synchronized fundamental transformation. So you have to connect the dots, as I said. It's not that we are improving. I mean, I hope we are in this stage 30 years ago when we talked about sustainable development.
Right. I would echo that. Let's move on perhaps to the next set of questions. Just conscious of time, we don't have so much time left. I wanna amalgamate perhaps the next set of questions into one for each one of you. And I think some of you have already started answering the question, but perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more, which is around specifically the role of banks, of commercial banks, of development banks in this transition, and not only the roles, but perhaps if you could speak a little bit about the measures, getting even more operational, more tangible. What are the measures that you have started putting in place that you think will have to be put in place in the near future, within commercial banks, within development banks, so that we're on track and the banking industry is on track to meet its commitments? Perhaps we can, again, Dalia, I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, I think the banking industry has a dual mandate, because banks is not just another economic sector, they bankroll all other sectors. We have a responsibility and a dual mandate, changing from within and helping change our ecosystem. All right, and these are very ambitious mandates. That's why sustainable finance was the only thing that was hammered by the sustainable development concept. Changing the system is very heavy, but what's more tedious, changing from within, because you have to revise the fundamentals of the industry, which has been there for more than a century. So I would say the most difficult thing is to get ESG across all your policies and SOPs, but we have to go behind a little bit. It's about really changing the fundamentals, because you have to undo years of education in your MBAs or in your finance or economics that taught us that we have to work to make profits without any consideration to environmental and social considerations. You have to undo executive education that talked about return on equity and just that. You have to revise your understanding of risk to broaden it beyond the traditional credit market operational risk. We were never taught that environmental and social risk matter, that climate change risk would top the World Economic Forum list of risks as the source of financial instability. We could never imagine that the S factor represented in health or a virus could trigger the worst economic crisis in the Second World War. So, and I see the suffering of bankers when we get to them and they say, you know what? Forget about return on equity. I mean, after he turns CEO or a managing director, no, it's about the environmental and social. So it's addressing policies, addressing the mindset, which is very difficult, and then revising risk, revenue generation, understanding that you can make money out of the green, out of climate change, or out of microfinance, learning how to report on your data. Data is very important. It's a list of things. Talking about, if I'm going to mention what we have done, would you like to talk about that now? Or we'll shift later to individual steps taken by Commercial International Bank?
No, if you could do that briefly now, just the gold nuggets. Yeah, the gold nuggets of what you've put in place already.
I think CIB developed the sustainable finance policy that mandates the integration of the ESG across all functions and departments inside the bank. It was more progressive because for the first time, a bank would introduce system thinking inside its policy, acknowledging it's not about siloed approach, that it's about the interrelationship with disciplines. I think having the process and institutional pillars addressing ESG governance frameworks. CIB is a founding signatory of the PRB, Principles for Responsible Banking, and the Net Zero. And there is a comprehensive architectural framework that help us deliver on our strategy and on our system building internally, because you have to integrate it, like weave it into your fabric. And this is very tedious, but we are progressing. I mean, worth mentioning that within 2020, CIB was the first to issue its green bond. I mean, amidst the challenge of COVID, you're moving ahead. You had the resiliency because we mandated sustainability early on, and it taught us how to be resilient. Impact assessment and target setting are operational tools that are given by the Principles for Responsible Banking to help us deliver on our alignment. So this is a nutshell. I don't want to go further to leave room to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalia. And over to you, Judith, on this question. You know, what are your priorities at the moment in making this happen?
Yes, thank you. So as what Dalia had said, we are also founding members of the UNEP-FI as a signatory on the Principles for Responsible Banking and also the Net Zero. And so one of the things that we have quickly implemented is to look at how do we define our green portfolio, and already we started that process. So in the year 2019, we had some kind of baseline, which was at 4.2%. And so what we are doing now is to go through the whole process, just looking at our whole book, looking at our various sectors to see where is the potential. Where is the, first we look at the pipeline, the potential which we can build in maybe in the short term, and then to see holistically what can we classify as our green book, just to be able to look at what really is our positive impact and what is our negative impact, and then how do we grow the negative impact, how do we mitigate that so that then we can translate it into the positive impact. So we have a target of 15%. That means we have 5% every year between now and 2025 to build on that. So this year, because the whole year we are spending it in terms of just reviewing our whole portfolio, once we get that baseline, then from 2022, it will give us then that baseline target for 5% for every year incremental, and we see how the book will grow from there. Also, we are looking at developing green products. So we are working also with our marketing team to see how can we develop some of our green products so that we can be able also to showcase to our customers and to see whether they can be able to get it. So that is a process that we are going through today. And also one of the things that we have done is to have environmental and social governance practices also implemented for the whole bank. So this has also been well done and of course approved from the board, approved by the senior management, and we have targets for every employee under the environmental and social governance to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And a few words from you, Davina, on recent progress and priorities, and then we'll have to wrap up because we only have 1 minute left now.
Yeah, thank you so much. And on what my colleagues have said, I'll just say that the bank has a platform called the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change, basically to anchor these conversations. And so we've been in conversation with UNEP-FI to enhance this through trainings and capacity building and customizing taxonomies that speak for the continent. But there's a question on the chart in terms of the African Union leadership role. The African Union, in fact, has a heads of state committee on climate change, currently chaired by the president of Southern Africa. And what they have done, even from COP21, when the Paris Agreement was signed, Africa came with two flagship programs. One on renewable energy, the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative, and the Africa Initiative. Because of that, I'll say that in 2018, the entire bank energy portfolio was all renewable. So there is political leadership on the continent to anchor this. We currently host the Global Center for Adaptation at the African Development Bank. And currently at Climate Finance at the bank, adaptation exceeds mitigation, meaning that we are investing in Africa's resilience. So, and this is all driven by the political will on the continent. All 54 countries have signed the Paris Agreement, which speaks for that, and 52 of the 53 have ratified their NDCs at Parliament. So these are legal documents. So indeed, in terms of policy framework, the terrain is well covered. I'll stop there just to say that we have what it takes, but we need is innovation and scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Davina. And unfortunately, we do need to wrap up. It's been a fantastic set of exchanges. Thank you very much. Thank you for your organization's leadership in this space. And just to perhaps land it somewhere, I think, and quoting some of you, I think this is all about individual financial institutions making a commitment to changing themselves internally, so that with that credibility, they can then work with their like-minded peers in the industry to effect and change that would be more systemic, because that's what's needed, scale and pace, to quote you too, Dalia. And with that, I think the more the banks and financial institutions that can join this journey along those lines, the better. If you're interested, get in touch. And with that, thank you to the panelists and thank you to our audience today, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Remco. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.